And we are live here in the Storycraft Cafe. I am Hank Garner, your host, as always. Today, Katie Shepard joins me. She has a brand new book that released yesterday. If you're joining us live, Sweeten the Deal is the name of the book, and what a fun read this is. Takes a lot of tropes, turns them on their head, and just has a lot of fun with a story that you might think that but completely reinvents it. Such a fun book to read. Katie, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on.
I'm excited to have you. Katie, I like to begin the show with a fun question to kind of kick things off and get things going. And one question I love to ask people is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Um, so I write for a living. I am a lawyer,
Ah.
which involves some storytelling craft, but the stories are often about contracts and very boring things. So I had been doing that for almost a decade before I walked out of The Last Jedi and wondered if anybody else had thought that Kylo Ren and Rey were about to kiss in that movie. Went onto the internet and found an article about the existence of fan fiction, and thought, oh well, that sounds interesting. I'm going to check that out. And it turns out that I was not alone in thinking that those two ought to kiss. Led me to my first writing community, which was fan fiction, which was a wonderful, fun, loving, supportive place. For several years before I made the turn to traditional publishing.
I've not had a lot of experience with fan fiction, but I've always thought that what a great way to get your feet wet in storytelling and kind of to take an existing world and an existing story, so you kind of can see how the bones of story work, but then feel free to kind of play around in that playground. And I know I'm mixing all kind of metaphors, but is that kind of what you found in fan fiction? Just kind of the stability of an existing story and the ability to kind of play around with it and see what else can be done. What exactly did you get from writing fan fiction?
First, it's just starting to write.
Yeah.
A lot of people have stories that they want to tell, and then they don't. And the barriers to entry in fan fiction could not be lower.
Mm.
Anyone can start and immediately post it on Archive of Our Own, and then there is a community that is very supportive and provides immediate feedback. That loves to talk about what you've written, to help you make it better, to talk about characters, to talk about prose, to talk about different literary techniques. And I think that people who have not been part of the fan fiction world would be surprised at sort of the breadth of things that are out there, and the way that these communities form, where they talk about it as though it is literature, and write it, with the same level of care and attention to what they're doing as people in publishing. Certainly, it's something that I did not know about, that I did not expect, and that was a really wonderful point of entry to me. It just, writing felt like a muscle that got stronger the more I did it. So after you have turned out a few 100,000 words, with other people who are cheering you on and sort of have the same love for stories and characters that you do, it really solidifies writing as a thing that feels good and is fun to do.
You mentioned that Star Wars was the world that initially brought you in, but were there other worlds, other characters that got your attention?
Oh, sure. You can find it. I mean, I'm most of it is still up there. It was a number of different fandoms, and I did not really. A lot of people start when they're teenagers and are raised in this fandom world. I was not. I just did not encounter it until I was already an adult. But there are fandoms for books, there are fandoms for movies, there are fandoms for TV shows, and a lot of people are participating in multiple at the same time. So I mean, I was in several, on very, it was this experience where I was on Twitter, I was on Tumblr, I was on Discord, I was, reading fan fiction. I was looking at these, literary analyses of the original canon works. I was chatting with people on multiple platforms at the same time, and it was, and then there was the pandemic when all of that felt
Yeah.
like it was heightened and more intensive because everybody was in their living room all day long.
Right. And we were all looking for some sort of community that even if we couldn't be present with other people in the flesh in a lot of cases, I feel like that was a real boon for online communities. And it sounds like this was the perfect place to, for an online community to really stand up and embrace each other, so to speak.
And I was lucky enough to be part of this community with a number of different really talented writers who were thinking about moving from writing fan fiction to fun to moving into publishing. In some cases, making that a career because they had either made connections during fandom or had absorbed enough information about how the publishing industry worked to make that transition. And so, I was by no means the first one to do it, but seeing other people go through that process, what that looked like, thinking about it, along with them, that all came together during the first couple of years of the pandemic that I felt like it was something that I could do too.
I'm glad you brought that up because that was going to be the next thing that I asked you was I'm sure there are lots of people that just enjoy writing in someone else's world and the community aspects and the aspect of just taking a familiar story, putting your twist on it, letting these characters continue to live and other stories and adventures. There's lots of upside to this that I can tell. But what is it that makes you want to make that jump? Because I'm sure there are plenty of people that are just perfectly happy to just stay in that world, and that's all they ever need. But what is it that happens to a writer that says, "Okay, I've enjoyed this time, but now I have stories that I want to tell with all new worlds and characters." What's that jump like?
Well, I think a lot of us were edging further and further away from the source material until it
Yeah.
was, almost unrecognizable. And at that point where you think, you are so far from, the original material that why don't you take that leap of faith and make the jump,
And that's
and
kind of what happened with is E.L. James that did the 50 Shades books. That was originally Twilight fanfic, if
I
I
think that
remember
was
right.
Twilight fan fiction. You see it happen in several different genres. I think that the most, that the authors who tend to be most open about it are romance authors. There are a number of romance authors who are very proudly, former fan fiction writers.
Right.
You also see science fiction and romance authors. You see, authors like Naomi Novik, who was one of the founders of Archive of Our Own, still, writes romance, writes YA, writes science fiction, fantasy, and also still posts really good fan fiction on Archive of Our Own, and has been very supportive of the fanish community for decades. I think it's
So
become easier to talk about, even if it's not necessarily happening more than it used to.
yeah. So what was that? What was the story idea, or was it a character that? What was it that kind of led you to create a world all your own? What was there a catalyst moment? Was there a character that walked onto the stage of your mind? What was it that was kind of the first instigation for that first original story you wrote?
So this book that that just came out yesterday, Sweeten the
Yeah.
Deal. This was actually the original novel that I went on sub with. It is my second
Interesting.
book. It is my second book, but it is the book that I wrote first and queried and went on sub with. And I approached it, very close to the way that I would have done if I were writing what we call modern AUs, alternate universes,
Yeah.
and thought about, you know, a funny trope and how I would twist it. How would I do it in a new way? This is, I mean, it is a ridiculous premise. It is a common trope that you see in multiple fandoms. This sugar
Yeah.
baby AU, because it is a fun way to bring the characters into contact, to make, put them in this ridiculous situation. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to invert it, see what it looked like, if I changed the genders, changed the typical scenario. Would that be funny? Was was really the main question that I was going at, is would it be funny if you put a very serious, dignified, man in a situation where he is the sugar baby to somebody younger and more naive, and then I built out from there. I just because one of my favorite storytellers is Patrick Weeks, who doesn't write romance. They write science fiction and fantasy, and they are the lead writer for the Dragon Age franchise, in addition to being a traditionally published author. And their catchphrase is ridiculous premise executed faithfully. That you start with something really silly and then just commit to the bit, treat it as though it is, the absolute foundation for an actual world that you are going to build. So I took this inverted sugar baby trope and then just, acted as though I was going to stack an entire real world on top of it.
I love that. I heard someone say one time, and whoever said this, please forgive me. I'm not grasping it right now, but they said that they wanted to write a cowboy western, but they weren't confident enough to get all the details right, and so they figured, well, if any time that you're in that situation, just introduce a unicorn into the story, and then all bets are off. It can be whatever you want it to be. So they wrote, I think it was two authors. They wrote a cowboy western, but with unicorns, and but approached it from the perspective of, this is absolutely real. There's nothing tongue in cheek about it. They just happen to be horses with horns, and they had the most fun with it, because once you give it credence and let it have the gravitas that that any real story deserves, that it became a phenomenal series for them. So
That sounds fantastic. I mean,
right.
I love that idea that, it just don't break character as you are telling this ridiculous story.
Yes, yes, and it was, it was a lot of fun for them to write, and I've always loved that idea. Just introduce something a little ludicrous, but then give it all the love and attention that it deserves, and let it be its thing. You said something that fascinated me, and you said that your new book, Sweeten the Deal, was actually the first book that you wrote, and tried to go to market with, and you'll have to tell us the story in a minute, but it didn't sell for whatever reason. But then you published Bear With Me Now, and that was successful. I hear from authors a lot about they will write a novel, and for whatever reason it doesn't sell. It doesn't. No one picks it up, and so they start writing a second novel, and then hopefully that one sells. But they kind of abandon that first project, and it becomes a desk drawer novel or trunk novel, or we've got all kind of terms for the thing that doesn't sell. And rarely will you see someone go back to that thing that didn't sell and try to shape it up, or whatever the deal is. And But then on the other hand, there are people that will write one novel and it doesn't sell, and they'll just go back to re-editing, and they'll just work on it and work on it and work on it until it does sell. And the attitude difference between, someone that will write a book, it doesn't sell, and they just abandon that, or put it to the side, start another one until something does hit. And maybe it's that the author doesn't have the, you know, she or he hasn't accumulated the skills yet to tell the story they want to sell, or maybe the market's just not ready. Whatever the situation is, but the difference in people that will set a project aside, go to something completely different, or the people that will just keep at it until this thing is ready, whether the writing is ready or the market is ready, whatever. But it sounds like you kind of did both. What happened? Tell me the story. I'm fascinated.
So it's a little different. This one, I queried with this book, Sweeten the Deal, and joined up with my agent, who then, went on went on submission with this book. And this book was always imagined as part of a trilogy, which is, slightly less common in contemporary romance than in historical fiction or in historical romance. But I imagined these loosely related characters, and had three different stories I wanted to tell. And this book, Sweeten the Deal, was going to be first. Then there was going to be a second book involving two characters that are introduced in the book. And then there was going to be a third book that was going to involve one of the characters who's in all three books, and then a new character. And that third pitch for what was going to be the third book was actually the sort of the hook for Bear With Me Now. And when my editor got the pitch for the trilogy, she said, "Actually, I really like this, this third pitch. I really love bears. Tell me more about the bear book. Could I have the bear book first?" And of course, I was like, "Well, of course you can have whatever you want.
Right.
I'll write whatever you want me to write." And so I turned around and reimagined how a few characters met and were introduced. And Bear With Me Now was my debut, and it was planned to be the third book of the trilogy. And I did have to make some changes to my outline to introduce characters in a different way than I'd planned. But it was the same characters that I'd been thinking about from the beginning. So we had Bear Book first. Now we have Sweeten the Deal, which was going to be which was with the original plan, and then next year we're going to have No One Does It Like You.
Wow. So, you had Sweeten the Deal written already, and you had a an outline for the Bear book. How long did it take you to write that second book? With the knowledge that someone was interested in it, did that make a big difference? You write that first book in complete anonymity. No one knows about it. No one's expecting it. But there's something about that second book when people are expecting something, and does that change the level of tension? Does that change the ferocity with which you write? What was?
I had a deadline.
Mm,
People talk about sort of the sophomore curse, that it is really hard to write your second book.
yeah.
Now, but that for most people, that is a book that they are writing while their first book is already out for trade reviews, and so they are, for the first time, they are getting independent feedback on their first book while they are writing a book. And that wasn't the case for me. I had, it was just me and my editor. And I had a very short deadline. I wrote it in about 4 months. And it was different in that, it was a book that I had promised somebody that I would write. It was a book that, I was contracted to write, but obviously nobody could read it until I had written it. I wasn't getting, reviews or feedback, until I, had to be like, okay, this is the book, this is it. I hope it is what
Yeah.
you were expecting, and send it to my editor. Uh, whereas Sweeten the Deal, I wrote it over. Well, the first draft came together over just a couple of months, but had many more rounds of feedback, as the novel that I was querying. So I feel like I didn't get into that, sophomore curse where you're writing as you're getting feedback until I was writing my third book. Because the third book that I turned in a couple of months ago, I had to, draft and revise, after Bear With Me Now was out in the world. So I feel like I got to write 2 second books and deal with both sort of the deadline pressure, imposter syndrome questions.
Right.
Bear With Me Now, and then write a book, while I'm getting active feedback on my writing with Bear With Me Now. So hopefully that means that the next book is going to be super easy, super smooth. It'll be
Right.
the fourth book. I should have, it should happen just as easily as the ones that I was writing with my friends in my living room.
Well, I know that every writer I've ever talked to deals with imposter syndrome, and that's just where the blank page is the great equalizer for no matter whether you've published one novel, never published a novel, or you've published 100 novels. Everyone starts a book with the same blank page, and there's nothing there, and you have to show up as the writer and let the magic flow. But after you've published a couple, you kind of push the imposter syndrome to the side because you have proven something to yourself and to the rest of the world. I can complete a novel. I can get from beginning to end. I can create characters that someone resonates with, someone likes the book. I can develop a plot that goes somewhere. They're even though everyone deals with it, there's a certain level of confidence that comes from just completing something and having a history with something. So was that third book where you're actually dealing with the sophomore issues kind of in a backward sort of way? Do you have some of those things to rely on? I know I feel this way, but I have accomplished this in the past, and people have loved it. Does that help?
I mean, because I write, very much to spec for my day job as a lawyer. I
Yeah.
tend to think, there is going to be never did I question my ability to turn out 90,000 words along the outline that I delivered.
Right.
The question is, nailing sort of the promise of the premise of, making it something that is not merely, effective, but, pleasurable to read, because that, I mean,
Hmm.
that is the big point of the romance, the romance genre.
Right.
That you are going to feel good about yourself in the world when when you close this book. And doing that, um, you know, the voices of the worst critic that you got on the first book, because fanfic, the community is so supportive. There's a big, you do not get mean criticism when you are writing fanfic. You will get constructive criticism, but you will never get
Right.
somebody just saying this is terrible and I hated it. Um, it I had to learn to, protect myself from, people who didn't like it, because people who've bought a book, are entitled to not like it.
Sure.
Um, I do not need to hear about it. And figuring that out halfway through writing book 3.
Yeah. Yeah. You are a practicing attorney. You've mentioned your day job a couple of times. Did you did you have to develop some sort of work life or work balance? Juggling your life as an attorney, your life as an author, and your private life. Where you have relationships that you have to maintain and all of this. Was that ever a struggle, kind of dividing up the time and figuring out, which hat you were going to wear at which time?
Well, it's more that this was my fun and relaxing hobby that I turned into a side hustle. So, it took a while for me to realize, I'm not writing more than I did when this was for fun, but why am I, so much more drained? And I realized, well, this was the thing I did for fun. Now this is a thing that I am doing, much more seriously. I'm going to have to, find something else. I'm going to have to replace, that time to just decompress and relax. I'm still writing on lunch breaks and evenings, but I'm also going to have to find some time just for self care, because I can't think that I'm going to feel as good about myself as I did when I had one job and a fun hobby, now that I have a day job and a night job.
Right, right. Um, let's talk about Sweeten the Deal for a minute. Caroline and Adrian. Tell me about these characters. You mentioned that you wanted to take a tried and true trope and kind of turn it on its head. Was that the initial idea for this book? Just taking something that everyone's familiar with, but inverting it and just seeing what comes out of that.
Yeah, it's the sugar baby AU. You will find them in most fandoms. It is, it is a setup for a lot of romance novels where you
Yeah.
have, a character, and it's almost always an older, wealthier man who is trying to commodify his relationship with a younger, more naive woman. And then, of course, feelings nonetheless, persist or develop, despite
Yeah.
the attempts to commodify the relationship and use it to create, emotion, maintain emotional distance between the characters. And I just thought that it would be fun if, what if it was the young, naive woman who had the money and the power that money, gives you in a relationship? What if things were a little bit more even on the power scales? And, what if I changed nothing else about the personalities of the people involved, and, left them to, to deal with, this, this inversion and the expected, distribution of power between, an older man and a younger woman.
I love it. I love it. So then do we get to play with some of the other dynamics of that we see in the enemies to lovers or enemies to friends, and then enemies to lovers? Do we get to see some of that in the book?
And we do. I like to describe this as sort of fake dating to friends to lovers. Because one of the most fun things to me about writing this was just that Adrian is horrified the entire time that he is in this situation. That he is somebody who thinks of himself as very as a very respectable person, as a person who tries to do the right thing. Who is, as one of his friends says, surprisingly conventional for an artist. And him constantly, just being appalled that this is where he is in life, that he is, getting $1,000 a week from this young woman from the sticks, who doesn't even want to sleep with him. And writing it just gives me an opportunity to have him, responding, in this, fun, silly way to every situation I put them in.
Yeah. You've mentioned a couple of times the word that some writers love, and it strikes fear in other writers, and that's outline. Um, how do you approach story in the beginning, and how much does your pre-writing take up in your process? Like how detailed do you lay the story out before you start drafting?
So a thing that I learned to do from fan fiction is not to start unless I know how it ends. I need to know where I'm aiming for.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I can just get lost. I can't completely, fly by the seat of my pants. I know where I want to aim. I've got some ending image. I've got some resolution in mind. I don't like to have every single scene outlined. I like to have sort of islands, a chain of
Yeah.
islands. So I know where I'm starting. I know some places I want to hit along the way. and then find myself between those places. That's how I've really found that I get the best payoff, is if I know I've got a few really good moments, and then I focus, on getting there and setting those up. That if I've got the big, beats, I don't tend to worry too much about each individual scene, how I'm moving between them.
Yeah. I like to use the roadmap analogy, because I too like to know how it's going to end before I begin. But like if you're driving from California to New York, you can go along the south. You can go, from Arizona to Texas, and through the deep south, and then turn and go up. Or you could go across the Midwest and through Utah and Colorado, and then the Missouri, and Chicago, and you go that way. You're going to end up at the same place, but they're going to be wildly different experiences along the way. So yeah, I like that too. That having some points along the way that you're going to hit, and then allowing yourself the freedom to kind of create spontaneously in the confines of that thing that you've created. I like that. Sweeten the Deal is available everywhere now. Go visit your local bookstore and pick it up. If you don't have a great local bookstore, we're going to put links to it in the show notes where you can grab it from Amazon. It's available in paperback or Kindle or audiobook. Katie, have you listened to the audiobook yet?
When that Bear With Me Now came out, I was very excited to hear the audiobook. I'd picked out the audiobook narrator, and so I made sure to get a copy. And when I tried to listen to it, I lasted about 30 seconds before just cringing into the sun. Oh no, I wrote those words and somebody else is saying them out loud. So I can't do it.
I understand that.
I love my narrator. I've listened to her other books. She is wonderful. I just cannot listen to her say words that I wrote.
I understand that. Sweeten the Deal, available everywhere now. We'll have links to it in the show notes. Go grab it today. Katie, if people are just discovering you and want to follow along for all the fun that is to come, and dig into your back catalog, is there a place online that is a good place for them to start?
I try to be funny on Instagram. I'm at Katie Shepard Books on Instagram, and then my website is katieshepard.com, where I have links to things related to me.
Excellent. We'll link those up to make it easy for folks to find you. Katie, this is so much fun chatting. We're going to post links to Sweeten the Deal. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you for having me.